Welcome to another episode of Down Home with me, the Rambling Southern Gentleman. Our main stories for this episode are Dolly Parton, the day the Mississippi flowed backwards, and Grapico. So sit back, kick your shoes off, pour you some sweet tea or maybe a Grapico, and let me entertain you for a little bit. And our featured food for this episode, king cakes. Now, y'all, if you ever been anywhere near Louisiana and Mobile, Alabama between January and Mardi Gras, you already know king cake ain't just a dessert, it's a full-blown season. Now, king cakes go way back, way before beads, parades, and Bourbon Street. Its roots trace all the way back to medieval Europe, where folks baked special cakes to celebrate Epiphany, also called Twelfth Night, the day the three wise men, or the three kings, finally made it to see the baby Jesus. That's where the name king cake comes from. It was a cake meant to honor the kings, but it also came with a little surprise baked right inside. See, back then, they'd hide a bean or a coin inside the cake. Whoever found it was crowned king for a day. That lucky soul got bragging rights, and usually the responsibility to buy the next cake or throw the next party. Now, fast forward a few hundred years and a whole ocean away. French settlers brought the tradition with them to Mobile and then Louisiana, especially to New Orleans, and over time it picked up a whole lot of southern flair. The cake got bigger, sweeter, fluffier. Since Mardi Gras had originally been a New Year's-centered holiday before moving over to a Fat Tuesday-centered holiday based on the Easter season, king cakes became a recognizable icon of Mardi Gras even after Mardi Gras made the jump to a Fat Tuesday affair. The king cake went with the shift, so now there's a whole king cake season that spans from Epiphany, January the 6th, to Fat Tuesday. And eventually, that old bean turned into a little plastic baby meant to represent the Christ child. And that's when king cake became more than just a dessert. It became a social contract. If you get the baby, congratulations. But also, buddy, you just signed up to bring the next cake. And those bold colors you see on top, that's not just for looks. The purple stands for justice, the green stands for faith, and the gold for power, the colors of Mardi Gras itself. So every time you cut into a king cake, you're not just slicing up sugar and cinnamon. You're cutting into centuries of tradition, stretching from ancient kings all the way down to your neighbor's kitchen table in South Louisiana. It's also worth noting its territory has spread deeper into the South and can be found in bakeries and supermarkets as far north as the Tennessee state line. And if you happen to bite into that little plastic baby, well, hope you got room in the budget for the next one. Now, for our featured phrase for the show, I normally like to feature an old Southern word or term, saying or phrase, but today I'm featuring a quote by Dolly Parton. And that quote is, "If you don't like the road you're walking, start paving another one." Now, that sounds like good common horse sense to me. But you may be asking me, why am I featuring a quote by Miss Parton? Well, you see, Dolly will turn 80 years old. Yes, that's right. 80 years old tomorrow, January the 19th, 2026. So in honor of her 80th, I've decided to dedicate a bit of the show to her. Since Down Home is a show that celebrates down home Southern traditions, humor, stories, people, places, and things, Dolly fits that bill perfectly. Growing up in the South, I have always known who Dolly was since I was old enough to remember. To be honest, I guess I've had a little crush on her since my youth. Well, since I was old enough to have a crush anyway. You see, there was always something calming in her voice, a softness and a strength. Something that felt comforting, encouraging, promising, and something familiar. She is the embodiment of all the good Southern aspects and none of the negative. She felt like people from down home way, people I identified with. She's just plain down-to-earth people, and she exposes her human side when so many celebrities lose their roots in humanity. She kept her heart and common roots even after becoming rich and famous. She was born on January the 19th, 1946, in a little cabin without running water or electricity over on Locust Ridge, tucked away in the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. She was one of 12 kids. She wrote her first song at the age of 5, recorded her first single at age 13 called Puppy Love, and worked her way up to fame and fortune to become one of the richest female entertainers of all time, not just in country music, but entertainer in general. She's a songwriter, singer, actress, author, businesswoman, and philanthropist. What outshines everything else in her career? Her giving back. Whether it's providing employment to the people of her home back in the Smokies, or her unbelievable generosity towards the victims of the wildfires of Gatlinburg and the surrounding areas, to her imagination library, she just keeps giving and giving. I could go on and on for an hour giving you the history of her life and career, but I don't have the time on this show. So, in honor of her 80th birthday, I have produced a 3-part podcast on the life and career of Dolly. All 3 episodes are available now on my YouTube channel, The Ramblin' Southern Gentleman. You'll get a little taste of the info from the podcast here on the show today, though. The first main story for this episode of Down Home is the story of Dolly's hit song, I Will Always Love You, so stay tuned. So I was doing a little spring cleaning, getting a head start on it anyway, and I ran across some unused tickets I had purchased to see a comedian. Now, I've never been to a concert, except some of those all-night gospel singings, which I thoroughly loved, and I've never been to see anyone speak or perform. Never had a desire to. I don't care for crowds. However, there was one person, other than Dolly, that I did want to see perform. Her name was Jeannie Robertson, and she was coming to the Alabama Theater, a venue I really like. So, as soon as I found out she was coming to the Alabama, I purchased tickets. I was really looking forward to seeing her too, but then sad news came. She passed away not too long before her scheduled show at the Alabama. So, the one time I ever purchased tickets to see someone, they up and passed away on me. Maybe that's a sign. I also came across a recipe for Alabama white sauce. Now, you may have heard of the Alabama white thing, but have you heard of Alabama white sauce? It's considered a barbecue sauce. However, it's very versatile, and I love it. The mayo-based tangy sauce originated in Decatur, Alabama, around 1925 and was created by Robert Big Bob Gibson, a railroad worker who opened his own barbecue joint in the 1920s. The sauce was originally intended for smoked chicken, but I have found it goes with just about anything, even if it's just a piece of cornbread. Another thing I unearthed while cleaning was residue from pumpkin spice rolls. Now, that's right, old remnants of canned sweet rolls. Now, back last year, I had purchased a can of pumpkin spice rolls. You know the type, like the cinnamon rolls by Pillsbury. You know, the cans you have to peel the label back and whop on the counter really hard so they bust open. Or some say press the seam under the label with the end of a knife to break open. Well, that's just it. They don't just break open, they bust open. They explode. I guess I was traumatized as a child by them because I see one of those cans now at Walmart and I want to cover my head and stop up my ears. Well, I had purchased this can and it got pushed to the very back of the fridge. You know how some things do. Out of laziness from not wanting to prepare it right away and just shoving your groceries in. So, out of sight, out of mind, I had forgotten all about it. Well, I found it and looked at the date, and it was way out of date. But something I noticed before the date was it was bloated. The can had expanded and was barely holding together. It looked like a lot of pressure was being withheld by that wax cardboard. I knew it was on the verge of disaster, so I carefully made my way over to the trash can. But I didn't make it, because all of a sudden, boom, all heck broke loose. Something wet and with great heft hit me in the face. My hand stung, my eyes were closed as I tried to protect them. I swear it was as if I was having a war flashback. I thought I could hear shots and helicopter blades in the background. I opened my eyes when the chaos ceased to find the can had exploded and blew its contents all over me, in my face, in my hair, all over the ceiling and walls. I cleaned it up the best I could, and I thought I had taken care of it all, but I'm still finding dried bits of pumpkin spice rolls behind the microwave and atop the cabinets to this day. Now, before we have to take a break and then jump on over into our main stories, I'm going to tell you a little story that Dolly told, I believe, to Jimmy Fallon one night on late night TV. And it goes a little something like this. It may not be a direct quote, but it's the best I remember. Anyway, she said that when she was growing up, there was this gas station, a little tourist stop there near the Smokies, near her home, and they had a bear out front. They had it in a cage, and it was a big draw for the tourists visiting the Smokies. They'd stop in and buy gas and buy Cokes, and to see the bear, of course. Well, it became a custom of the tourist to buy a Coke and give it to the bear. And the bear grew pretty large at the time after drinking so many Cokes a day from the tourist. And then she said some hippies rolled into town, some mean tourists, and they bought a Coke, but instead of giving the bear the Coke, they emptied the Coke out of the bottle, and they replaced it with gasoline. They thought it'd be funny to see the bear drink it. Well, they gave that bear that bottle of gasoline. The bear, thinking it was a good cold bottle of Coke, turned it up and drank it. And as soon as it hit the bottom of that old bear's stomach, it went absolutely plumb crazy. Just absolutely wild, and tore that cage apart, and it took off lickety-split down the parkway, boogity, as hard as it could, and it went for a long time, and then just fell flat on its face. Well, Jimmy asked, did it die? And Dolly replied, no, it just ran out of gas. Now don't get mad at me, that was just a little joke. Anyway, it's that time. It's time for a break. Stay tuned, and when we come back, we'll dive into our main stories, which are the story of Dolly Parton's I Will Always Love You, the day the Mississippi flowed backwards, and the story of the history of a Southern classic, the drink Grapico. So stay tuned. I'll be right back. Welcome back. So, friends, let's talk about the song I Will Always Love You. A song written by a girl from East Tennessee with fire in her spirit and poetry in her fingertips, Dolly Parton, and a song that would go on to circle the globe, touch millions, and become one of the most enduring love songs ever penned. However, it's actually written as a goodbye song and not a song just declaring love for someone. Back in 1973, Dolly Parton was standing at a crossroads. She had been working with her mentor and longtime partner, Porter Wagner, traveling the country, singing on a show, and co-writing songs together. But Dolly's wings were itching, and she knew she had to fly on her own. That decision wasn't easy, not by a long shot. So she put pen to paper and wrote what she would later describe as a farewell and a blessing. A song that said, I love you, I always will, but I have to go now. That song was I Will Always Love You. Recorded on June the 12th, 1973, in Nashville's RCA Studio B, Dolly's original was short, country pure, and soaked in sincerity. She registered the words and music with the U.S. Copyright Office that same year, a savvy move she'd happily thank herself for later. When released in March 1974, it climbed the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart and hit number 1, a glorious moment for a song that spoke of goodbye and love all wrapped in the same breath. And here's a neat little twist. Dolly didn't just score one number 1 with this tune, she scored 2. Nearly 20 years later, in 1982, Nearly 10 years later, in 1982, she re-recorded I Will Always Love You for the soundtrack of the film The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, in which she also starred. That version, too, hit the top spot on the country chart, making Dolly the first artist to take the same song to number 1 twice with different recordings. If you listen close to the lyrics, that plain-spoken line about hoping life treats a loved one kind, and that above all, you wish love, that's Dolly's heart shining through. It wasn't about romantic love in the traditional sense. It was her way of honoring what came before, her way of saying thank you to Porter Wagoner and to that chapter of her life. In the midst of the turmoil of Dolly leaving Porter's show, the two were very heated emotionally. Animosity filled the air surrounding the show because Dolly had informed Porter of her intentions of leaving the show. So after she had written the song and before it was released, she sat Porter down and sang him the song she had written in which she was telling him goodbye. After she had finished, he looked at her through teary eyes and told her she could go. But he didn't make her leaving easy. In fact, he sued her. But that's another story for another time. You can hear more about that in my 3-part podcast on Dolly available on my YouTube channel. Now here's a story fit for Southern lore. Word got around that the king himself, Elvis Presley, wanted to record Dolly's song. Dolly was thrilled at the thought. According to Dolly, in an interview later, the recording date had been set and everyone was ready. But then Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, dropped a condition on the night before the recording was set to happen. They wanted half of the publishing rights in exchange for letting Elvis record it. Dolly, ever proud of her songs and what they meant to her future, politely but heartbreakingly said no. She later admitted she cried all night about it. She really wanted to hear Elvis sing her song, but she told W Magazine that the publishing was the most important copyright in my whole publishing company at the time, and she simply couldn't let it go. Dolly has joked in interviews that turning down Elvis was one of the best business decisions she's ever made, and with a smile said that when Whitney Houston's version blew up worldwide, she made enough money to buy Graceland. It's worth mentioning here that Priscilla later told Dolly that Elvis was a big fan of the song and actually sang the song to Priscilla as they were leaving the courthouse after their divorce was finalized. So let's fast forward to 1992. And here's where the story takes a turn that nobody could have fully predicted. Whitney Houston was cast in The Bodyguard, and they were looking for a love song that could anchor that soundtrack. I Will Always Love You, already beloved by country fans, was chosen as a last-minute replacement for another track. Whitney's version was produced by David Foster and transformed into a sweeping pop soul ballad. Released on November the 2nd, 1992, it didn't just do well, it dominated. Her rendition topped the Billboard Hot 100 for a record-breaking 14 weeks, longer than any song in years. And it sold more than 24 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling singles of all time, and the best-selling single by a female artist ever. Critics called it her signature performance. Rolling Stone praised her powerhouse delivery, and USA Today hailed it as iconic. Whitney herself won Record of the Year and Best Female Pop Vocal Performance at the 1994 Grammy Awards for the song. When Dolly first heard Whitney's version on the radio, she was driving down the road. She later told an interviewer that she had to pull over because she was so moved and so filled with adrenaline. She was afraid she'd wreck trying to listen. That's the sort of respect and joy she felt. not jealousy, not resentment, just pure admiration for what Whitney did with her song. Over the years, I Will Always Love You found its way into the hearts and voices of many artists. It was covered by Linda Ronstadt in 1975, Leanne Rimes, Kenny Rogers, and countless others. Dolly herself recorded a duet version with Vince Gill in 1995. It charted respectfully and even hit around number 15 on Billboard. They also performed it together on the CMA Awards that year, a real treat for fans. In more recent years, Broadway star Kristen Chenoweth recorded the song in 2019, even releasing a duet recording with Dolly, a beautiful blend of stages and styles. So what makes I Will Always Love You endure? Maybe it's the universal truth at its heart, that love isn't always about possession, but about gratitude and release. Maybe it's the poetry in Dolly's simple lines. Maybe it's the way Whitney raised its voice to the stars. Or maybe it's the way, no matter how many times you hear it, it still brings a tear or a smile. Maybe both. As the sun sets and the lightning bugs start to dance, think for a moment how a song written from a goodbye became a song of everlasting affection, crossing genres, generations, and souls. That, my friends, is the magic of music and the legacy of I Will Always Love You. Now, let's talk about the January the Mississippi River broke. Most folks think the scariest thing that ever happened in the South was a hurricane, or maybe a flood, or maybe a war. But the most terrifying thing the Deep South ever lived through happened in the dead of winter in January of 1812, when the ground itself turned on the people who trusted it. And it all started in a little forgotten place called New Madrid, Missouri, right on the Mississippi River. Now back then, this wasn't the Midwest like we think of today. This was the American frontier, mud roads, log cabins, riverboats, candlelight, and wilderness stretching as far as the eye could see. Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Alabama were still young, raw, and half wild. And on a cold night in December 1811, as families were sleeping by their fireplaces, the earth began to groan. Not shake, not rattle, groan. People said it sounded like giant wagons rolling underground. Then came a roar, and the land began to jump like it was alive. Cabins cracked open, chimneys fell through roofs, trees snapped like toothpicks. But that was only the beginning, because the worst of it came in January 1812. That's when the Mississippi River, the backbone of the South, broke. One eyewitness wrote that the ground rose and fell like waves on the ocean. The earth rolled under people's feet so hard that grown men were thrown to the ground. Some folks had to grab trees just to keep from being tossed. In parts of Tennessee and Arkansas, the land split open. Cracks wide enough to swallow a horse belched out black mud, sand, and sulfur-smelling water. Some of those cracks are still there today. And then, the Mississippi River did something no river should ever do. It ran backwards. People along the river watched in horror as the water stopped, then surged upstream, creating waterfalls where there had never been waterfalls before. Boats broke loose, whole riverbanks collapsed, forests slid into the water. Makeshift docks, cabins on those collapsed riverbanks, and fishing camps were swallowed up by the raging river. Some places along the river went dry for seconds as the ground broke open and swallowed up the water. One man wrote that the river stood up like a wall. Imagine standing there in January, cold wind on your face, watching the mightiest river in America totally switching flow directions. That wasn't a storm, that was the earth tearing itself apart, and in some places the river had its path moved hundreds of yards over from its original riverbed. Curves and bends were smoothed out in some places, while new curves and bends appeared where the path of the river was straight. These earthquakes were so powerful they were felt all the way in Boston. Church bells rang in the night hundreds of miles away. In Alabama and Mississippi, people didn't know what was happening. They just knew the ground wouldn't stay still. Some thought it was Judgment Day. Others thought God had finally lost patience with humanity. And honestly, you couldn't blame them. The shaking kept coming, over and over for weeks. More than 2,000 earthquakes rocked the region between December 1811 and February 1812, Every time people started to relax, another one hit. Walls cracked, wells dried up, new lakes appeared where farms used to be. One of them is still there today, Reelfoot Lake in Tennessee, created when the land sank and filled with water during the quakes. An entire lake was born in winter. Towns disappeared. New Madrid itself almost was destroyed. People ran into the cold, barefoot and half-dressed, praying in the dark. Some never went back inside. They slept outside for months because they were terrified the ground would swallow them in their sleep. And maybe the most unsettling part of it all, the quakes changed the map. Land that used to be high sank. Land that used to be low rose. Rivers shifted, swamps formed. The South was reshaped right under people's feet. And here's the part that should make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The fault line, the New Madrid seismic zone, is still there. It runs under Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama, and it is still active. Geologists say that earthquakes of that size could happen again, and this time there were cities, bridges, pipelines, and millions of people sitting on top of it. The Mississippi could move again. So remember, the next time you look over that slow, muddy river, remember this. Once upon a winter, long ago, the Mississippi River turned around, the South shook, and the land itself proved that it was never as solid as we like to believe. Sometimes even the ground can break. Now let's talk about something that brings joy instead of devastation. Let's talk about Grapico, purple gold of the Deep South, the drink with a New Orleans past and an Alabama heart. Now pull up that old wicker chair, friend, and let me tell you a story about something so purple, so sweet, and so southern it might as well have been baptized in cane sugar and Alabama sunshine. I'm talking about Grapico. Not just a drink, not just a soda, but a cultural artifact, a purple-hued time machine that can take you straight back to church picnics, gas station coolers, and Mama's Sunday roast in one single sip. If you grew up anywhere in Alabama, or really anywhere in the Deep South, you didn't discover Grapico, you inherited it. You might swear it was born and raised in Birmingham. And I'll tell you this, Birmingham did raise it. But Grapico's story starts a little further south and a little wetter in New Orleans. Grapico was first sold as early as 1914 in New Orleans, Louisiana, created by a business called J. Grossman's Sons. Back then, soft drinks were booming, and companies were constantly dreaming up new syrups and flavors to mix with soda water at fountains and bottling works. Now here's what made Grapico stand out. It wasn't just a grape flavor. It was marketed like it was something close to a genuine grape drink, rich, vineyard romantic, the kind of thing that sounded wholesome and fruity even if you were drinking it out of a bottle you opened on a curb. And friends, that sounds like grape juice image wasn't an accident. From the start, Grapico's makers leaned hard into the grape imagery, and that's where the story gets, let's call it, Southern spicy. See, when Grapico hit, it became successful in part of advertising and packaging that implied it contained real grape juice, even though it was artificially flavored. And y'all, that wasn't just neighborhood gossip. That's in the historical record. The Federal Trade Commission eventually got involved, and when the FTC gets involved, that means somebody has been doing a little more than exaggerating, like a fisherman on his third retelling. Now, in the summer of 1917, an Alabama businessman named R.R. Rochelle, operating out of Birmingham with his Grapico bottling works, started buying Grapico syrup from the New Orleans makers and bottling it for the Alabama market. That move matters because it planted Grapico into the Deep South's everyday life in a way that stuck for generations. And if you've ever wondered why older Alabamians talk about Grapico like it's part drink, part birthright, well, it's because Birmingham wasn't just a customer. Birmingham became the lifeline of what Grapico later turned into. And here's where the plot thickens like gravy. In 1926, the original New Orleans business line changed hands. J. Grossman's Sons sold the Grapico business to Pan American Manufacturing Company in New Orleans. Pan American continued producing and selling Grapico syrup and also sold bottled Grapico in Louisiana through its related bottling operations. But Pan American also continued the same improper practice, marketing that strongly suggested their artificial grape drink was tied to real grape juice through visuals, copy, and presentation that made the average customer think, why, this must practically be juice. And the FTC did not find that charming at all. In 1928, the FTC charged Pan American with unfair methods of competition and deceptive practices. The proceeding resulted in an order that by 1929 made Pan American and related parties lose the right to use the word Grapico to designate their artificial grape drink. Now that's a sentence you don't hear every day. You can keep the grape soda, but you can't keep the name. That's not just a Brandon hiccup. That is the federal government basically saying you've been selling purple promises. So who kept Grapico alive? Well, Birmingham did. Here's the twist that makes this a proper Southern story. The folks in Birmingham, including Rochelle's operation, were treated as wholesale customers, not the architects of the deceptive advertising, and the cease and desist related to the name didn't wipe them out the same way. By the time Pan American lost the right to the name in 1929, Rochelle was already bottling and selling Grapico across multiple southern states. And that's how the brand's center of gravity shifted, from New Orleans invention to Alabama identity. Then, years later, Rochelle secured broader legal control. A federal trademark for Grapico was issued in 1940, giving his company national rights to the name. Now, you might be thinking, well, that was 100 years ago. Why should I care who implied what about grape juice? Because that little scandal tells you something about the South in that era. Prohibition hit in 1920, and suddenly everybody was thirsty for legal, flavorful drinks that felt special. Soft drinks weren't just refreshment, they were social life, treat culture, and a little slice of modernity. So if you can make your soda seem closer to nature, closer to fruit, closer to wholesome, you were going to sell more of it. Grapico rode that wave and then got checked for it. And honestly, that's part of why Grapico feels so mythic now. It's got a backstory with New Orleans showmanship, federal paperwork, and Alabama hustle. That's not just soda history, that's Southern business history. By the mid-20th century, Grapico wasn't just a product, it was a taste memory. In Alabama especially, it became something you'd see in church gatherings, high school football concession stands, turned into homemade ice cream, which by the way is my favorite ice cream of all time, and that magical cooler at the gas station where the bottles are so cold your hand sticks just a second too long. And over time, Grapico even pops up in popular culture and Southern storytelling as a recognizable Southern touchstone. Fast forward, the modern distribution story ties into Birmingham again. Buffalo Rock, a Birmingham-based Pepsi bottler, acquired the franchising rights to Grapico in 1981, and Grapico has been produced at Buffalo Rock's Birmingham facility in more modern times. And that matters because it explains why Grapico still feels like it belongs to Alabama, even though its earliest commercial roots trace back to New Orleans. Now let me tell you why Grapico matters in 2026. We're living in a time when people are tired of everything being the same. Same brands, same taste, same limited edition flavors that taste like shampoo. So what do folks do? They go hunting for regional treasures. They go looking for stuff their granddaddy drank. The stuff that tastes like a hometown. The stuff that reminds you the South isn't just a place. It's a memory you can sip. And that's where Grapico shines today. It's nostalgia you can buy cold. It's regional identity in a bottle. It's a conversation starter. You ever had this? And it's a reminder that a brand can survive a century if people love it enough and keep talking about it. And in the age of TikTok and YouTube, regional foods and drinks don't just survive, they get rediscovered. Grapico's story has all the ingredients: origin myth, New Orleans flair, a federal clampdown, and Alabama's long loyalty. So, the next time you see a Grapico, don't just drink it fast like you're late for work. Hold it a second, because you're holding a New Orleans-born syrup that charmed the early South, a brand that got tangled up in real grape juice implication in the FTC's long arm, and an Alabama-raised icon that proved a regional favorite can outlast trends, mergers, and time itself. And that, friend, is why Grapico ain't just soda. It's purple Southern history. Well, friends, it's that time. It's time for a break. Stay tuned. There's plenty more when we come back. Welcome back. You know, that story about Grapico takes me back. It's funny what sticks with you from childhood. I can remember Grapico being a part of some of my very earliest childhood memories. I guess it was my grandmother, Nanny Ree. You see, she detested the term grandmother, so this was our name for her, was the one who introduced me to Grapico. She did this by way of Grapico floats. Now, for those of you listening who doesn't know what a float is, you're forgiven. A float is simply a scoop or two of ice cream in a cup with soda poured over it. Most of the time it's vanilla ice cream, and the flavor of soda, or as all sodas are called here, Cokes, can be many varieties: orange sun-kissed, Grapico, root beer, or just plain Coke. And as it goes, one thing leads to another. I liked Grapico and Grapico floats so much, I started requesting grape milkshakes whenever we were fortunate enough to get a treat like a milkshake. And it was a treat. Unlike today, when those past treats have become everyday food, with our waistlines showing the evidence. It didn't matter that most of those milkshakes weren't made with Grapico. I still love the grape flavor. I still order grape milkshakes when they are available on the menu. And speaking of grape shakes, that brings me to a story of Wimp's. Let me tell you about Wimp's Dairy Bar from over in Steele, Alabama. Now, back in the day, say early 1990s, before life became too hurried and everything, including kids' entertainment being sequestered to electronic entertainment, we would spend hours roaming the woods, exploring the creek banks, and playing in the yard. After a day of venturing, like when me and my sister decided to take a rubber dinghy, or raft, that we had found tucked away in Daddy's workshop, and set sail down the creek at the bottom of the hill in front of the house. Now, this was shortly after my ingrown toenail surgery, and by the grace of God, I escaped an infection after getting that creek water in that open wound. Anyway, after a day of adventure such as that, Mama would call us back up to the house around dark by standing on the front porch and letting out the loudest whistle I've ever heard come from a human being. With that whistle, which I'm sure could be heard clean to Birmingham, we would come running out of the woods or out of the creek up the hill to the house. When we made it through the door, we were greeted with supper, most of the time, but there were a few times that Mama just didn't feel like cooking, and we knew what that meant. It meant one thing: Wimp's. With the absence of the smell of supper on the stove, we knew we were about to load up and go over to Wimp's to get supper. These would have been the evenings that Daddy worked second shift at the steel plant. These little trips were special, with just us and Mama. We would load up and drive through the holler over to Steele, where on Highway 11 sat a jewel in the crown of Alabama, Wimp's Dairy Bar. Wimp started out back in the 1940s or so as Eva's Pan Am Palace, a full-service service station and truck stop on Highway 11. It was a big, beautiful Art Deco-style building with rounded corners and brightly painted stripes around the curved roofline. From what I've been told, it offered a few limited rooms for a night's stay, gas, oil changes, car repairs, and a restaurant back in its heyday. As time marched on and the interstate came through, which led to modern gas stations on the exits, time forgot about Eva's. Winford Keeling, a.k.a. Wimp, and his wife Betty turned Eva's into Wimp's Dairy Bar. The year and full story behind it, I don't know, but I know it was Wimp's for a long time before I became familiar with it. We would pull up to Wimp's, park, get out, and walk up to the walk-up window, place our order, and then go back to the old two-door Buick Regal to await our food and shakes. When the food was ready, the lady would slide that window open, point to our car to signal it was our order that was ready, and after retrieving our food, we would set out back home in that old Buick, drinking our shakes along the way while our mouths watered at the smell of our food that we would soon enjoy when we got home. I believe you could dine in. I'm sure of it because we would watch people eating that we could see through the dining room windows, which set off to the side of the walk-up windows. However, we always got ours to go. Me and my sister always got the chicken finger baskets with fries, and Mama always chose the hamburger steak plate with fries and slaw. Later, Wimp's closed down due to Wimp's failing health, and I believe someone purchased it or rented it and reopened using the Wimp's name. But I don't believe it lasted long. I sure do miss Wimp and his dairy bar, but I miss those times in my childhood that made those sweet memories, like the one I just painted for you. In my research of stories to bring to you today, I ran across an interesting one. It's called The Man Who Saved Alabama from Starvation. Now, most history books will tell you about generals, presidents, and rich men. They won't tell you about the man who kept Alabama from starving to death. Because sometimes the greatest heroes don't carry guns, they carry clipboards, and they know how to get a train moving. This story takes us back to the winter of 1917, one of the coldest, bleakest winters the South had seen in decades. America was at war. Factories were overworked. Railroads were clogged. Coal was scarce, and Alabama was running out of food. The mines around Birmingham were still digging coal, but the railroads, the lifeline of the South, were frozen, jammed, and falling apart. Freight cars were stacked up in yards for miles. Food shipments from the Midwest never arrived. Flour mills went quiet. Grocery shelves went bare. And with this, people began to panic. In some towns, bread was rationed. In others, there was none at all. Mothers watered down soup. Children went to bed hungry. And nobody in Washington noticed, except one man. His name was William Gibbs McAdoo, and he was the director of the United States Railroad Administration. No, he wasn't from Alabama, but he understood something important. If Alabama Railroad stopped, the furnaces would go out, the coal would stop flowing, and America's war effort would collapse. So, when reports came in that Birmingham and the surrounding towns were on the edge of famine, McAdoo did something unheard of. He took control. McAdoo issued an emergency order that said in plain English, all food for Alabama moves first. Everything else waits. Railroad managers protested. Factories screamed. In other states, they complained. But McAdoo, he didn't budge. He redirected entire train lines, canceled luxury shipments, delayed non-essential freight, and then he did the most daring thing of all. He sent food trains straight to Alabama, no matter how bad the congestion was. These weren't little shipments. They were mile-long trains with flour, grain, meat, and canned goods rolling through snow, ice, and broken tracks. Men worked around the clocks, clearing the rails. Telegraph wires buzzed day and night. And when those trains finally rolled into Birmingham, people lined the tracks and cried, not because they were patriotic, because they were hungry. One newspaper wrote that the trains had saved the city from hunger and despair. Bread returned, mills reopened, families could cook again. Alabama didn't starve that winter because one man refused to let paperwork and politics get in the way of human lives. And here's the saddest part. Most people have never heard of him. There's no statue, there's no school named after him, there's no holiday for him. Just a quiet man who, for a few weeks in 1917, made sure Alabama could eat. So the next time you see a freight train rolling past, remember this. Once upon a frozen winter, a man used those steel rails to save a whole state from starving. And sometimes that's what real heroism looks like. So in my pursuit of trying to wind down and rest after my research and writing these stories for this episode, I sat down and wanted to watch a movie. One I hadn't seen yet, of course, a classic. So I started browsing and I came across Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. Now folks, all of my life I've heard of it. I've heard people talk about it. How it was an incredible movie and a contribution to the art of motion picture history. So I chose to go with The Birds. Now, I don't know exactly what I was expecting, but based on what I had heard from other people all of my life, I was expecting a thrilling, sensory-filling, stimulating, rip-roaring cinematic masterpiece. One that would make Swan Lake look like Swan Pond in the ballet world. A moving picture event to rival Sandy Patty's rendition of the Via Dolorosa in the musical world. Well, I didn't get any of that. It was a weird movie about some possessed birds who terrorized a woman. These birds, that looked like they were supposed to be pigeons at times and seagulls at others, were as big as buzzards. I can see where some people might take on a bird phobia after watching that movie. I know had it been a Southerner being harassed by birds such as Tippy was in that movie, or had it taken place in Alabama, said person wouldn't have been bothered very long. Some birdshot shells later, there wouldn't have been a bird problem. It reminds me of a time a friend of mine was being dive-bombed by a bird that had nested in her workplace's entryway. Anytime she or anyone else came or went, that bird would swoop down at their heads. A pest control person was called to remove the nest, but upon inspection, they were all informed that it was a very rare bird in Alabama and was on the endangered list, and the nest couldn't be moved. My friend was noted as saying that if the bird didn't move on soon, it would really be endangered. It soon moved on, though, I'm afraid by the encouragement of a maintenance man who didn't take into consideration its endangered status. Anyway, that brings to mind the story of old Hearst Mathis, who lived way back in the valley. He seemed to be older than the state of Alabama. He didn't have a vehicle, but he did have a trusty mule and wagon that he would make his way over the mountain to the store whenever he needed supplies. Now this was way before my time, but I've heard about it all my life. He had a crow that talked. Yes, talked, or at least that was the story. But I don't have time to tell that story on this episode, but I promise I'll save it for next episode. Well, friends, it's that time. I've run out of time. Now, if you've got a story that you would like me to tell or cover, or if you have a question you would like answered on the show, or maybe need a piece of advice on a topic or situation, email me here at the show. The email address is contactdownhomeshow@gmail.com. I welcome any input, comments, words of encouragement, or concerns. I want to thank you for listening, and until next time, be blessed. Oh yeah, and happy 80th birthday, Dolly.